National Drive Electric Week here in the U.S. Folks are raising awareness about the many benefits electric vehicles can have on communities. WKYT's Alexa Minton met up with two members of Evolve Kentucky to learn more about electric vehicles right here in the Bluegrass.
Fred Rockhold and E. Gail Chandler are members of Evolve Kentucky, a grassroots nonprofit hoping to encourage their fellow Kentuckians to make the switch to electric vehicles and turn Kentucky's transportation clean.
And our mission is to promote sustainable transportation.
E. Gail herself is 80 years young, but she's only been driving her electric vehicle for 3 weeks. Her switch from a gasoline-powered car to an electric vehicle came because of her own personal goals of sustainability.
I've always had a lot of interest in the environment. My family is Appalachian, and they have been interested in the environment, picked up litter beside of the road.
According to the U.S. Department of Energy, the state of Kentucky only has 7,560 electric vehicles registered as of the end of 2022, a number that Evolve Kentucky is hoping to increase for 2023. The group has installed multiple free charging stations across the Commonwealth with the intent to continue to push for a clean change in Kentucky's roads.
Gasoline doesn't get much greener. I think we've got about as far in efficiency on that as we can.
But for people like E. Gail and Fred, it's not just about doing their part to reduce emissions. It's about building a green future for generations to come.
I think we're stewards, and I think we have responsibility to the next generation.
Evolve Kentucky knows that there are skeptics out there, but with a green future in the forefront, there's nothing to worry about.
They got the stop pedal on the left, the go pedal on the right, and the wiggle wheel in the middle. And they drive like any other vehicle.
In Frankfort, Alexa Minton, WKYT.